The Eagles were one of the most disappointing teams in the NFL last season and probably had the biggest disparity between roster talent and on-field production. They had a pretty good start, 10-1 through the first 12 weeks, but they stumbled to the finish line and lost 6 of their last 7 games, topped off by a complete blowout in the wildcard round. It was a combination of coaching, scheme, and personnel issues that led to their collapse, and this was a critical offseason for Howie Roseman to fill as many of those holes as possible so they don't waste another year of this core group of veterans. And considering Philly's needs and the cap space and draft capital that was available, I would give Howie Roseman an A to A- for how he handled this offseason. When you have so many moving pieces, you can't be 100% confident that it'll play out the way it looks on paper, but he did about as good of a job as you could expect, and this isn't a situation where you've got to do a bunch of mental gymnastics to see this team being a Super Bowl contender. So this video, we're going to break down the Eagles roster, looking at every player, every position group, and how they compare to the rest of the league. They have as much high-end elite talent as all but 1 or 2 other teams in the NFL, which we'll definitely discuss, but I am going to do more in-depth film analysis of the unknowns and high-variance X factors that will have the greatest impact on the 2024 season. For the most part, those are going to be new additions and younger players from the last few draft classes. I'll be showing these roster graphics throughout the video. If you're new to this series, I've rated every player in the NFL based on this scale. I normalize all the ratings into scores for each position group and combine them into offense, defense, and overall scores by this weighting table. And I have the Eagles ranked as the 7th best team in the NFL, 5th best offense, and 11th best defense. We've got coordinator changes and coordinator upgrades on both sides of the football. On offense, they're going from Brian Johnson to Kellen Moore, and I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole of what was wrong with Philly's offensive scheme last year. I feel like that's been covered extensively at this point, but it was one of the most rigid and least imaginative offenses I've seen since I've been watching tape. They operated almost exclusively out of the shotgun with spread formations. They had the 2nd lowest pre-snap motion rate in the NFL. They ran a total of 4 under center play action snaps and pretty much never targeted the middle of the field. It was a purely ISO passing game with goes and curls outside the hashes, none of the quick in-breakers to take advantage of AJ Brown's ability as a runner. They had no answers for the blitz all season. A lot of that comes back to the route distribution, with Hurts not having an easy outlet to get rid of the ball, and being so tied to the gun really limits the diversity of your run game. So they replaced him with Kellen Moore, who is 100% an upgrade. I don't think he's a game-changing OC. He isn't the inventive, revolutionary play caller that he showed flashes of being early in his career, but he runs good concepts. This will be much more of a multiple offense that can attack you in different ways and has more answers built into the system. Not going to elevate bad personnel, but he doesn't need to. Philadelphia has the talent, and I think he'll put them in positions to have success. But looking at the roster, they have the pieces to be a top 5 offense. They have elite talent at important positions, and every position group ranks in the top 12. The quarterback room does rank 12th, and I was definitely too hard on Jalen Hurts when I did my initial ratings. I had him at an 81, but after finishing the Eagles tape from last year and considering the offensive coaching staff and the fact that he was injured, I moved him back up to an 84. I do still think it was a down year compared to what he showed in 2022, and I'm not sure he's ever going to be super efficient targeting the middle of the field, but he's accurate, he's got a good arm, he can extend plays and provide value as a runner when he's healthy. With a real offensive scheme, I could easily see him re-emerging as a top 10 quarterback in my eyes at least. And you got solid backup quarterbacks. I don't love that they traded for Kenny Pickett because I liked Tanner McKee as a prospect and I thought he looked really good in the preseason last year, but it's hard to do much better than Pickett and McKee as your quarterback depth. At running back, they signed Saquon Barkley in free agency, and statistically he is not coming off a great season. 3.9 yards per carry. He had the 2nd lowest EPA per attempt out of the top 40 running backs, and honestly I was pretty disappointed with his tape last year, but running back is the position in football that's most dependent on surroundings, and the Giants' offensive line was abysmal. There were so many plays that he didn't even have a chance to create anything positive. He was still top 10 in rushing yards over expected per attempt. He's never had great vision, and at times he would kind of exacerbate the bad blocking, but running behind the Eagles O-line, I think he'll be so much more productive, and it would shock me if at the end of the season we evaluate Philadelphia's offense and say if only they had a better running back, they would have been successful. Saquon is more than good enough, and there's obviously the potential that he gets back to that top tier and ends up being a real strength. Kenny Gainwell is a solid backup third down back, but it seems like the rookie Will Shipley has a chance to earn that RB2 spot. You can never know how seriously to take training camp reports, but he's gotten good reviews, and there was a lot to like about him as a prospect. Very elusive in open space, has potential as a receiving back. I wasn't that impressed with his ability between the tackles. He doesn't really have the power and contact balance to be that effective running inside, but can still offer some value on third down. And then receiver and tight end both rank 5th in the NFL. It's a top-heavy group of weapons, but looking just at the starting lineup, there's only a handful of teams that are in the same conversation as the Eagles. A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith is one of the best receiver duos in the NFL. Hopefully Kellen Moore has A.J. Brown running a more diverse route tree. It's funny, I'm a Titans fan, so I've watched A.J. Brown for his entire career, and in Tennessee, it's like every time they got him the ball, it was on a glance route or a quick slant or something quick over the middle. It wasn't until very late in his Titans career that they started to really feature him as a threat down the sideline. But then he goes to Philly in a trade that can only be described as collusion, and it's like that's the only way that the Eagles use him in their passing game. He still hasn't really had a play caller that's allowed him to be a complete receiver and run the full route tree, but he can do pretty much everything at a high level. And then Devontae Smith, I have is tied for the second best wide receiver 2 in the NFL behind Jalen Waddle. They just gave him a 3-year, $75 million contract extension, well deserved. The depth at receiver is pretty concerning though. Paris Campbell has never really shown to be an effective receiver, and he's had a really difficult time staying healthy. They drafted Johnny Wilson and Anais Smith on day 3, which I think were good picks where they got him. Maybe one of those guys could work into the rotation. I would have more confidence in Johnny Wilson probably at this point, but 5th and 6th round picks, you can't really bank on that happening. And then you got John Ross, who kind of is what he is at this point, and Covey, who's a punt return specialist. If one of their top 2 receivers goes down, they're in a bad position, and even just looking at their wide receiver 3, you'd like that spot to be a lot stronger. Dallas Goedert is somewhere between the 5th and 7th best tight end in my opinion. He missed some time last season, so he had a down year from a production standpoint, but good route runner, reliable hands. He's effective after the catch. They get him involved a lot on screen passes out in the flat, and along with George Kittle, he's one of the best run blocking tight ends that isn't a blocking specialist. There are other, third tight ends that are better as run blockers, but as far as players that are actually receiving threats but also give you value in the run game, I think Dallas Goedert and George Kittle are my top 2. Grant Calcaterra, it seems like, is going to be the second tight end. He has 9 career receptions, so I can't really speak too much on him as a player. And then CJ Uzomah heading towards the end of his career, and Albert O has never really panned out. So the starting group of weapons is as good as it gets across the NFL. I think there will be a steep drop off, especially at receiver if somebody gets hurt, but at full strength, Kellen Moore has a relatively very easy job. The offensive line is transitioning at certain positions, but they still rank 1st in the NFL for me. I talked about this in my power rankings video, but offensive line is a weak link position group to a certain extent. You could make the argument that it's better to just have 5 solid starters than having 3 star players and 2 question marks like I think the Eagles have. So if you wanted to put the Lions or the Colts ahead of the Eagles, who are more just solid across the board, I wouldn't push back on that. But they have easily the best tackle duo in the NFL. Lane Johnson, I feel like, is an underrated player at this point. He's not underrated in the sense that he's a sleeper that people haven't heard of or anything, but I feel like the general NFL fans and media kind of just throw him into a bucket of like good top 10 tackles and don't fully recognize his greatness. I have him tied with Trent Williams as the best tackle in the NFL. I think Trent Williams is the best run blocker and a very good pass blocker. Lane Johnson is a very good run blocker and the best pass blocker. It's such a stark difference what the Eagles ask from their tackles compared to pretty much every other team in the NFL. Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata are out on an island every snap. They pretty much never get any chip help or double teams. Their level of exposure and difficulty of assignment is exponentially higher than any other tackle, and Lane is the best pass blocking tackle that I've ever watched. I've been watching tape for 4 to 5 years, so I'm not really making any all-time claims, but I think the best compliment you can give to a tackle in pass protection is that every rep looks the same, and that's absolutely the case with Lane Johnson. His 45-degree set is so smooth and repeatable. He's got great hand usage, really good anchor. He and Jordan Mailata will rank a little bit lower in pressure rate and sack rate than you would think based on their level of play. But like I said, that has more to do with their exposure on a snap-to-snap basis than anything. I know stuff like the NFL Top 100 list is low-hanging fruit this time of year, but I mean, having Lane Johnson in the 40s is a travesty. Jordan Mailata is actually a slightly better run blocker than Lane Johnson in my opinion. Still a very good pass blocker, but he will have some losses. He's pretty tall, so pad level can be an issue at times, but I have him as the 6th best left tackle in the NFL. Definitely not a player that you're going to complain about. And then you've also got Landon Dickerson, who I think is easily a top 10 guard. I have him as the 6th best guard in the NFL across left and right, with 3 all-pro caliber players, 2 of them at tackle. The foundation of this offensive line is incredibly strong, but center and right guard are big questions heading into 2024. Jason Kelce retired, and they did a great job of planning ahead for this. It's much better to have a second or third year player stepping in than to be relying on a rookie. Cam Jurgens is a very similar player stylistically to Jason Kelce as an undersized zone blocker with elite movement skills. He took a redshirt year as a rookie and then started 12 games at right guard last season, and with him moving back to center this year, you're definitely going to see a drop off in play from Jason Kelce, but you need Jurgens to be more consistent and at least be an average starter. So this is going to be our first mini film breakdown getting into some of his tape. I watched every snap from last season, and he definitely needs to improve, especially in pass protection, but based on what he showed last year, I'm at least cautiously optimistic in Cam Jurgens. I'll start with the run blocking, which I think was very promising. He has special movement skills as a zone blocker. You see this with his ability to climb to the second level, connect to moving targets, and erase linebackers. This play, the Eagles are running inside zone. He hits the combo on the nose tackle, climbs to Bobby Okereke at the second level. You can see how quickly he arrives to his target and then how much hand pop and strike power he has when he makes contact. He throws him onto the ground, comes back for seconds, and gets a double kill. When you're running outside zone and he's got a free climb to the second level, it doesn't matter how fast that linebacker's scraping over the top, flowing with the run, he's gonna outpace them and connect to the block. This play, you see how explosive he is off the snap. A linebacker's got to see the play immediately to have a chance at beating him to his landmark, but he's also very controlled connecting to the block. He lands his punch, flushes him downfield out of the play. Right here, he connects to the linebacker before the other offensive linemen even connect to their blocks on the line of scrimmage. He covers 4 to 5 yards in a split second, squares up, gets his hands inside. As the linebacker's trying to win the edge and work around him, he stays attached, sustains the block, and drives him into the ground. Similar play here where you can see how quick your processing has to be as a linebacker to have a chance of avoiding him making contact. Any kind of hesitation or false step, and he's right in your grill before you can even process what's happening. He also has some pretty good drive power, and on down blocks and reach blocks, again, does a good job of staying connected, keeping his hands inside. He isn't big or strong enough to create consistent movement off the snap, but he sustains the block and at least works you downfield or onto your back. So it's a shame we only got 1 year of the Cam Jurgens, Jason Kelce combo blocks, but I expect him to be a very good run blocker. Don't have really any concerns with him in that phase. The pass pro definitely needs to improve, but I thought he showed a lot of upside and actually didn't struggle in the areas that you would expect. At his size, you would expect him to struggle the most with power rushes, but I only saw 1 rep where he lost to a true bull rush, and the reason he lost is because he got tripped up on Jason Kelce's foot. Right here, he gets driven back initially by the bull rush, tries to reset his anchor, ends up landing his left foot on Jason Kelce's right foot and gets put on his back. But the rest of his tape against power I actually thought was very solid. He has good hand usage, does a great job of consistently getting his hands inside, meeting power with power, and he's listed at 303 pounds. He was definitely undersized coming out of Nebraska, but just eyeballing it, he doesn't look that small, especially for a center. His ability to sit down and resist a bull rush and redirect it backwards, I actually thought was pretty impressive. Really nice rep here against Dexter Lawrence to resist the initial surge, set his anchor. Once Lawrence tries to counter into a swim, he raises his pad level. Cam Jurgens takes advantage of that, stays connected with his hands, flushes him out of the pocket. This play, Chris Jones is going in with power, but Jurgens does a great job with his hands here of using kind of the forklift technique to catch him by the wrists and prevent him from establishing contact. When Jones starts to shoot his hands, Jurgens quickly catches him, prevents him from cleanly connecting to his frame, and then he refits his hands inside, sets his anchor with a wide base, and resists the bull rush. And then outstanding rep from the same same game. You've got George Karlaftis with a wide alignment. He's got a long runway to build up momentum and charge up his bull rush, but this is just perfect technique and timing with his punch to get his hands inside and underneath. He raises Karlaftis' pad level, removes his leverage advantage, sets his anchor, stays connected for the entire rep, drives him into the ground. And you saw this pretty consistently throughout his tape. He's got enough play strength, really good technique. I don't worry about his anchor nearly as much as I thought I would heading into it. Where he actually struggled the most was mirroring crossface moves, keeping his feet active, and preventing late pressure, especially at his edge. He lost on an inside club here to Micah Parsons, which I don't even really hold against him that much. I mean, Parsons is one of the only players I've seen get a sack on Lane Johnson. That's gonna happen with pretty much any guard that he lines up against. But he lost here on this stutter club to, I think it's Kalia Davis for the 49ers. Steps inside to threaten the A-gap, gets Cam Jurgens to lean and lower his head into his punch, and then the arm over through the B-gap. Jurgens is too overextended to mirror that. Right here, he gets his feet crossed up against Chris Jones and loses to a club swim, which pressures Jalen Hurts into a sack. The consistency with his footwork and pass sets and his slide quickness when defenders are attacking his edge is by far the main thing he needs to improve in year 3. On a related note, he also gave up some pressures where initially he did a good job resisting the bull rush, but he would just plant his feet in the ground and wasn't prepared to mirror a secondary move. This play, great job to stand up the initial bull rush from Dexter Lawrence, but then he opens up that inside foot, gives Lawrence an opening, and he isn't ready to mirror this arm over. I would say of all the younger players on the Eagles roster that we're expecting second or third year jumps from, Cam Jurgens is probably near the top of the list of players that I'm most confident in. He has the traits and movement skills, he has really good hand usage, he's just got to improve his footwork, and I still think he has top 10 center upside. Right guard is, I think, a bigger question. At this point, I've got Tyler Steen as the starter. He was a third round pick in 2023, only started one game, which was week 9 against the Cowboys, and I have no idea what to expect. His performance in that game didn't give me much confidence. He had a 13.2 pass blocking grade, gave up 6 pressures on 35 pass blocking snaps. That's expected for a third round rookie against a really good defensive front, but it's purely a wait and see situation with Tyler Steen. As always, Micah Parsons identified the least experienced player on the offensive line, lined up in front of him and hit him with a club swim. Actually got him again with the same move later in the game, but he gave up pressure on a forklift to Osa Odigizua. He was late to pick up a TE stunt, and then DeMarcus Lawrence beat him with a cross chop. I viewed him as kind of a raw prospect, and that's what he showed in his one start, so he's got to take a major step forward in pass pro for me to trust him to be on the field. I actually thought he had some good moments in the run game. He did a really good job on this reach block, clearing the way for a Kenny Gainwell touchdown. He had number 95, Jonathan Hankins, in hell this game. A couple other nice reps where he did a good job sustaining the block and put him on his back. So right guard has a chance to be a real weakness. I think as long as Cam Jurgens is at least average, you can live with one weak spot on the offensive line. Once you get to 2 or 3, that's where it starts to really get dicey for your offense as a whole. If Steen isn't the starter, they've at least got a good amount of options that could potentially replace him. Mekhi Becton looks like he's going to be depth at either tackle spot or either guard spot. He's shown flashes of being a really good player, has a ton of natural talent. His tape last year was hard to watch. I wouldn't put money on him turning it around, but you never know what Jeff Stoutland can work up. I remember when the Titans signed Andre Dillard, I watched his like 1 or 2 starts when he was with the Eagles, and my takeaway was he could at least be a replacement level starter, but he leaves Jeff Stoutland and sets an NFL record for sack rate in his first year with Tennessee. Matt Hennessy was a decent center for Atlanta. He missed all of last season with an injury, also played some guard in 2022. They just signed Nick Gates, who's kind of the definition of a replacement level starter, and then they took Trevor Keegan in the 5th round. I heard Ben Solak describe him as pleasantly mid, which is just a chef's kiss description. You got Fred Johnson as tackle depth, and then Brett Toth, I think is how you pronounce it. Pretty sure I saw him getting first team reps in one of the training camp practices. They at least have options. It's not great depth in a vacuum, but compared to the rest of the league, I would say it's above average offensive line depth. The main thing that has to happen, again, is that Cam Jurgens is playable. If you check that box, you can patch something together at right guard. Even if it's not a great option, you can at least live with one weakness. On defense, they also made a coordinator upgrade, replacing Sean Desai and Matt Patricia with Vic Fangio, an all-time great DC. I don't think this was a well-coached or schemed defense last year, but compared to the offense, I think the personnel was much more to blame for their lack of success. success. So Fangio will obviously help, but you also need young players to develop and some new additions to hit the ground running. But I actually have 5 out of 6 position groups ranked in the top 20, and we'll start with edge rusher, which ranks 13th in the NFL. I think as a pass rusher, Bryce Huff was an upgrade to Hassan Reddick, who showed some signs of regression last season. Bryce Huff is in his prime. He's like the gold standard of designated pass rushers across the league. Last year, he ranked 2nd in pressure rate, 3rd in pass rush win rate. He just hasn't shown the ability to defend the run, so he's probably not going to be on the field for early downs. But the next 3 edge rushers are slight uncertainties in different ways. Brandon Graham has played fewer snaps the last couple seasons. I still think he's an effective pass rusher. He's got a really good bull rush, good counters, but for a 36-year-old pass rusher, it's like at a certain point the regression's going to hit. And then Josh Sweat really fell off last season. He was kind of the face of their inability to pressure the quarterback over the second half of the year. And what I saw with Sweat was a complete inability to win as a pass rusher against good left tackles. He had a dominant performance in week 2 against the Vikings backups. You watch that game and squint your eyes so you can't read the number. It looks like the old Josh Sweat. He beat up on Mekhi Becton in week 6. In week 7, he got a bunch of wins against Kendall Lamb, who was starting at left tackle for the Dolphins. But you look at his matchups against good left tackles, he was completely ineffective. Both of the Tristan Wirfs matchups, both of the Tyron Smith matchups, he couldn't get anything going. Trent Williams, the Bills tackles, they completely shut him down. I still think he can be an effective player in certain games, but when you get into the playoffs and he's going up against better competition, he's not someone that I can really trust to pressure the quarterback. And then Nolan Smith is another huge X factor for the Eagles defense. First round pick in 2023, only played 203 snaps as a rookie. I don't know exactly what to expect from Nolan Smith, but I at least think there's some upside. It's pretty hard to evaluate, especially as a pass rusher, because he's playing 5 to 6 snaps per game, and they're usually not consecutive snaps, so he doesn't have a chance to get into any sort of rhythm or like establish a pass rushing plan. His best rep from the season came in the wildcard game. He beat Luke Gedeke with an arm over and got a sack. He had some other reps where you saw the bend and the ability to turn the corner at the top of the rush. One of them was against Deion Dawkins. The other one, he gets some late pressure against Tyron Smith. But those were really the flashes that you saw from Nolan Smith as a pass rusher. And from watching all of his snaps, I actually came away pretty concerned with his ability to be more than a splash play speed rusher. He had a complete inability to win with power as a rookie, and it wasn't just like his bull rush wasn't going anywhere. He was getting dominated whenever he tried a bull rush. Now, a lot of these reps did come against elite competition, Tristan Wirfs, Tyron Smith, and he's apparently added weight and gotten stronger, which will definitely help. But to me, the central issue is a lack of length and an inability to establish first contact. Any tackle with good enough reaction time is going to be able to read him out, snatch trap him, and completely neutralize his rush. So he could be an impactful rotational pass rusher, but as far as being a full-time starter that you're trusting to go out there and win consistently, I just don't see that based on what he showed as a rookie. But the interesting thing with Nolan Smith is he is a superhuman run defender. Like, it should not be physically possible for him to be this good in the run game at his size. And I felt the same way about him coming out of college. His run defense tape was so good, and it's like every logical aspect of him as a prospect is telling me that he should just be a designated pass rusher. But the tape, I felt like, spoke for itself, and he got into the NFL and was really good in the run game. You see this play against the Bucks, how firm and accurate he is with his hands engaging with this block. He lands his punch, locks his elbows to separate the blocker from his frame, waits for the running back to hit his gap, and then violently sheds the block and finishes the tackle. Another good rep here against Cade Otton, where he just uses a push-pull on this base block, tosses him aside, and gets in on the TFL. This play, he's able to fight through this reach block, explode across the line of scrimmage, and meet the ball carrier. And then the Seahawks game in week 15, he had some nice reps. This play, he's lined up at 3 technique, discards Abraham Lucas, and makes the tackle. Right here, he anchors, resets his base, and then sheds the block from Charles Cross and lays a huge hit. Good job setting the edge here against Charlie Werner and holding the line of scrimmage. Doesn't make the tackle, but he forces Christian McCaffrey to cut back into traffic. When it comes to playing blocks, I only saw one negative rep from Nolan Smith's rookie season, and it was because he tripped and then he got flattened by a puller. His measurables and listed weight might tell you that he's a third down specialist, but I think he's good enough in the run game to play every down. 2 other quick things to mention. They dropped him in coverage a good amount, and he was pretty ineffective when he was dropping off the edge. He had 24 coverage snaps last season, and he allowed 5 receptions for 103 yards. He's pretty much just dropping to his spot spot, doesn't really have a sense for what's developing behind him. And then they also tried him at linebacker in the Giants game in week 16, and I don't think he looked great at that position. It makes sense based on what they had and his size and athleticism, but I don't think he looked that comfortable squaring up and tackling. But overall, I'm excited to watch Nolan Smith. If this was a situation where like they're banking on him to be their number one edge rusher, I would be very concerned. But as a rotational player with an increased role, I think he could add a lot of value, and if he can figure out some way to generate a bull rush, he could be a complete player. I've also got to mention Jalix Hunt, who I really liked as a prospect. I thought that was a great pick in the 3rd round. As a prospect, I thought of him as a developmental player almost purely because of his weight. In college, he was just not big enough to play the run or hold up at all on early downs. But for a converted safety that transferred from Cornell, I was pleasantly surprised with how refined he was as a pass rusher. And whenever he can get to a playable weight, I actually think he's ready to go and be a contributor. Reading some reports from training camp, it seems like he might actually be ahead of the curve. They've still got 4 players that should be clearly ahead of him on the depth chart, so I don't really think he'll make a huge impact in year 1, but definitely something to mention. Even with the loss of Fletcher Cox, the interior defensive line is very good, and depending on Jalen Carter's development, it could end up being the true strength of this defense. I did a full breakdown on Jalen Carter this summer, so check that out if you haven't, but he was outstanding for a rookie defensive tackle. He had 50 pressures, 7 sacks, the 2nd highest pass rush win rate for a rookie defensive lineman since 2006, and it's true that he was better in the first half of the year against some pretty bad competition, especially the Patriots offensive line in week 1, the Dolphins in week 7, and the second half was definitely less special, but I think his drop off in play is being overstated by a lot of people. First of all, I think he was a lot more effective over the second half of the season than a lot of people are saying, and I also think in this conversation we're understating how elite he was over the first half of the season. The first 7 or 8 weeks, he was looking like he was going to be Aaron Donald. Like, you would watch that tape and say he's going to be the best defensive tackle of all time. The second half of the year was just one of the best rookie defensive tackle seasons that we've ever seen. It wasn't necessarily historic or generational, but compared to most rookies where you're just looking for a few flashes but overall inconsistent play, it was very good what we saw from Jalen Carter. He's insanely explosive, he's got a rapid first step, really good lateral quickness to cross the blocker's face, and his club swim is absolutely lethal. That was by far his most common pass rushing move, and he had a lot of success with it, but his bull rush was also pretty effective, which I was kind of surprised with. He still has some issues playing with higher pad level than you want to see. If he can lower his pads and continue to get more consistent with his leg drive, I think that's a really good 1-2 punch for him as a pass rusher. He just needs to add a third move. If he can add a spin or a double swipe, that will really complete his pass rushing move set and create a situation where blockers can't key in on anything. Considering the fact that rookie defensive tackles usually aren't that productive, I'm definitely being conservative by giving him an 85 rating. He definitely has a chance to establish himself as a top 5 defensive tackle somewhere in the Jeffrey Simmons to Justin Madubuike tier. He's the best defensive line prospect I've ever evaluated, and if he develops the way he's capable of, that could really help this pass rush. Milton Williams is a really good second defensive tackle. He's a freak athlete that they took in the 3rd round in 2021. He's an excellent run defender, plays with great pad level, extremely violent hands, but with his athletic traits, he hasn't yet put it all together as a pass rusher, and he's not really a huge impact in that phase. He'll make some splash plays occasionally, but not someone you want to rely on for consistent pressure. He's never had more than 3 pressures in a game. And then Jordan Davis could definitely qualify as an X factor, 1st round pick in 2022. I was just really underwhelmed with his tape last year. He started off the season looking like he was going to be a breakout player, but the jump as a pass rusher never really came, and he honestly kind of regressed over the second half of the year. In the last 11 weeks, he had 8 pressures, didn't have a hit or a sack. He occasionally has a good rep where you see what he could be as a pass rusher, but there's just no consistency in that phase. And you'd be okay with that if he was a lights out run defender, but I thought he was inconsistent there as well. His size and play strength gives him a natural advantage, and he can do a solid job of holding the point in the A gap, still gets displaced and put on his back more often than I'd want to see for a player of his size, but acceptable run defense as a nose tackle. But he gets reached way too easily on outside zone, doesn't seem to read the play quickly quickly enough to stay in front of blocks. And even though he's an elite athlete, he doesn't play like someone that's in good enough shape to flow from nose tackle to the alley on a consistent basis. He ends up sealed off to the backside a lot when teams run wide zone. So there is still upside with Jordan Davis, and it's not like he's been a bad player. I'm just not that confident that he has another level he can hit. And then Marlon Tuipulotu is decent depth. I really liked Moro Ojomo as a prospect. Hopefully he can make the roster and carve out some sort of role. And Gabe Hall was a developmental UDFA that has all the traits, just had really bad tape at Baylor. But linebacker is the biggest weakness on this defense and this roster as a whole. I have them with the worst linebacker room in the NFL. And from what I can tell, it seems like the day one starters might end up being Devin White and Zach Bond, but the first player we're going to discuss is Nakobe Dean. They took him in the 3rd round in 2022, and Howie Roseman is a great drafter, but I think this was an example of a player that had a lot of name recognition and people expected him to go early, and then the Eagles get him in the 3rd round and is viewed as this massive steal. I really think he was drafted at just an appropriate spot, so I probably have slightly lower expectations for him than some other people, but his biggest issue is actually being on the field. He had 2 foot injuries last year, started week 1 but wasn't able to finish the game, missed the next 4 weeks, then he played week 6, 7, 8, and the first half of week 9, but went out with another foot injury. So at his size, with his injury history, I am pretty concerned about his availability at this point. But looking at what he did when he was on the field, I thought he was pretty average, I would say. In the run game, he's really instinctive, he's a quick processor, gets in on a lot of plays, and is able to stay ahead of the block development. He has to read plays quickly and keep himself clean because he just does not have the size to engage with blocks. There was one play where he got pancaked by a tight end, but for the most part, he didn't have a major issue staying on his feet. I do think in a bigger sample size that could show itself as a pretty big issue, but there was a good amount of just getting stuck to blocks, not really having an answer when a blocker gets his hands on him. He has to be someone that just keys the play instantly and is always a step ahead of the block, and he also needs to develop some ways of avoiding or evading blocks, even if it's not stacking or shedding, just being able to evade a block in open space. For him to be playable at 230 pounds, he's got to be a plus in coverage, and I didn't really see that last year. He made a couple nice plays in the screen game. He's got the range to go from the hashes to the sideline and defend a screen, so that's good. He also could have easily had an interception against Washington, but the pass got batted at the line of scrimmage. You see he's dropping into the hook. He anticipates the dig route developing to his left, drifts into the passing lane. If Sam Howell's able to make this throw, this could have been a pick 6, but Fletcher Cox bats it. But from the same game, he was late to pick up this slant route from Jamison Crowder, ends up giving up a first down. He bites on the play action here against the Dolphins, voids his zone in the hook, and gives up a reception to Jalen Waddle. This play, he's in man coverage on Jake Ferguson. He gets called for a DPI. I wouldn't have called this if I was the ref. Ferguson's running a stick nod, or sometimes it's called a stick pump route. He breaks outside, fakes the stick route, and then cuts upfield. There's contact on both sides here, but I feel like this should have been a no call. And then you saw a couple examples where his lack of size and length showed up at the catch point, and he just couldn't reach in and disrupt the pass. This play, he has decent coverage on Tyler Conklin on this in-breaker, but can't reach far enough to break up the pass. And then right here, he's a little bit late to break on this sit route, and he doesn't have the length to give himself an extra margin for error. But you've got to hope Nakobe Dean can stay healthy and win that job, because I don't think the other options are very good. Devin White got more mileage out of a decent 3-game run in the playoffs than I've ever seen, but for pretty much all of his career, he's been one of the worst linebackers in the NFL. He takes terrible pursuit angles, misfits, and vacates his gap all the time. He gets put on his back when blockers make contact, and he's an average wrap-up tackler at best. He actually had some decent moments in coverage last year. I thought the Jags game was great. He had a really nice interception and then made a quick break on a sit route in the red zone. And there were some other good moments last year. He definitely made some positive impacts in the passing game, but he gave up just as many plays. He's not like a consistent, reliable cover linebacker. When I was looking up training camp reports before I recorded this video, there was a lot of positive buzz about Devin White, and that would be great if he can develop into a good linebacker, but we got 5 years of sample size of the opposite, so I'll just believe it when I see it. They signed Zach Bond from New Orleans, and he's projected to be one of the other starters. I thought his tape last year was decent, but he was mostly an edge, outside linebacker, overhang type of player for them. In the last 2 years, he has 39 snaps at inside linebacker, so it's a pure projection him transitioning to that role. He has decent size, he's a high energy, aggressive player. He isn't a good enough pass rusher to be like a full-time edge, but as an off-ball linebacker, he can definitely add value there. Could end up being a steal, but it's just another dart throw at this point. They also drafted Jeremiah Trotter Jr. in the 5th round, kind of a similar story to Nakobe Dean, where everybody else was a lot higher on him than I was. I'm sure a lot of people view the pick as them getting a 2nd to 3rd round prospect in the 5th round. I think they got a 5th round prospect in the 5th round. For a small player, he just doesn't have anywhere close to the athletic traits you need to survive in the NFL, in my opinion. And Ben Van Sumeren was a UDFA last year, has a chance to make the roster, but he's only played 50 snaps, so no clue what to expect there. But I do think this defense can survive with bad linebacker play as long as the secondary's good. They had a similar caliber of linebackers all of last season, and they went 10-1 to start out the year, so it's possible to be a good team with bad linebackers. You just can't have your entire back seven be a weakness like it was last season, and there's reason to expect that the secondary should be improved. They invested their first 2 picks at corner. They're adding Isaiah Rodgers after he served his suspension. They brought CJ Gardner-Johnson back, and you're getting another year of development from Sidney Brown and Keely Ringo. There are so many avenues for this secondary to be massively improved from last year, but it's almost exclusively unknowns and if statements. There aren't a lot of known quantities that you can feel certain about. And starting with Darius Slay, he's an unknown kind of in the opposite direction as some of the other players. He's been a top 10 to 12 corner for most of his career, definitely had a down season in 2023, and he's about to turn 34. And I kind of went back and forth trying to decide what to rate Darius Slay. My opinion on him changed, it seemed like, with every game that I watched. He had some really good performances, but some rough games and some disaster moments where it really looked like he had fallen off athletically. I think Fangio's scheme should be better suited to protect an aging corner, but you need his regression to level off and not continue. The rookies, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, I liked both of them where they were taken. I had Mitchell 4 spots ahead of where they got him, and DeJean 7 spots ahead. I would expect Mitchell to win one of the starting jobs, whether it's an outside corner or in the nickel. DeJean, I didn't really see as an outside corner, but I do like him as a slot or potentially a safety. And it's August. I've been talking about these players for months. I'm ready to just see them play in the NFL. I'll put their scouting reports up on the screen, but I'm not going to go into any more depth. I am interested in Isaiah Rodgers. He was a really good corner for the Colts before he got suspended for gambling. Smart move by Howie Roseman to pick him up, and I think he's primed to be one of the starting outside corners. Based on the way he played the last time we saw him, he would be closer to an 83 or an 84. He just hasn't played football in a full year. They also brought back Avonte Maddox. He's solid depth as a slot corner. Josh Joby and Eli Ricks are competing for one of the last cornerback spots. And another X factor is Keely Ringo, who they got in the 4th round last year. He started some games for them at the end of the season and was definitely up and down, but showed enough that I'm at least interested to see what he can bring to the table. He has the size-speed combination of a 1st round pick. There's a reason that he was highly rated on a lot of people's boards. Again, I thought they got him at an appropriate draft range. I did not think his tape was very good in his last season at Georgia. The mirror ability and fluidity out of breaks I thought kind of limited him as a man coverage corner, but he had some moments last year. A nice pass breakup on a speed out to DK Metcalf. Did a pretty good job in press man against Tyler Lockett. He also got the game-winning interception against New York in kind of a prayer into the end zone, but his first NFL action was a disaster. He got torched in 14 coverage snaps against Dallas in week 14, gave up 2 catches for 47 yards, also got called for 2 penalties on the same play, and he allowed a game-tying touchdown in the 4th quarter against the Cardinals where he was late to break on the slant, left it completely uncovered. He is a really good run defender and a very physical player, but I think a developmental corner at this point. At safety, they brought back CJ Gardner-Johnson, missed most of last season with a torn pec. He's a really good playmaking safety nickel hybrid, should be an upgrade to what they had last year. Reed Blankenship was a great UDFA find. He's kind of a B to B minus cover safety, has good instincts, makes a lot of plays on the ball, but also gives up a lot of plays. He allowed 6 touchdowns last year. I still think you've got 2 quality starting safeties, and this is the 12th best safety room in the NFL. And Sidney Brown starts off on the PUP list, but he's a really intriguing prospect. He's a high volatility playmaking safety, kind of in the mold of CJ Gardner-Johnson. They're different players, but you get similar results and also a lot of inconsistent tackling. He didn't play a ton as a rookie, 334 snaps, but he made an impact whenever he was on the field. He had a pick 6 against the Cardinals on basically a punt return, fielded it at the 1, brought it back to the end zone. Nice play here against Dallas to break up this hole shot from the deep half, and then a really impressive recovery against Mike Evans here. He separates out of the break, but the ball is slightly late and inside. He recovers to the pylon, dives and sticks out his hand and breaks up the pass. But playing in the slot, he wasn't really a sticky man coverage player as a rookie, and he was a very unreliable tackler at Illinois, a 17.8% missed tackle rate for his college career. That was slightly improved to 12% as a rookie, but you still saw those inconsistencies show up in both phases. He's a complete maniac flying into his fit, so he will make plays in the run game, but he'll also miss some tackles in the backfield, and in the open field, he's not a consistent wrap-up tackler. I like his upside as a third safety dime backer. I'd feel worried about him starting at this point, but really good depth and definitely has the upside to improve. So the offense I feel like is pretty simple. It's just competent offensive coordinator, healthy quarterback, and they should be able to get back on track and pick up where they left off in 2022. You need Cam Jurgens to take a step forward. Right guard is a concern, and you need to stay healthy at receiver, but outside of that, this should be a top 5 offense. Defensively, I think there's reason for optimism, but there's a much wider range of outcomes, and there's a lot more unknowns at different positions. Josh Sweat, Brandon Graham, and Darius Slay are veterans that have shown signs of regression. Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean, Jordan Davis, and all of the rookies have upside but are unproven. And then Jalen Carter could be really good, or he could be the best defensive tackle in the NFL. The DC upgrade and adding Isaiah Rodgers, I think, should be enough to prevent this defense from bottoming out like it did last year. But I could see this unit being anywhere from the 25th to the 5th best defense in the NFL. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and leave a comment. These team breakdowns take a ton of time to put together, so greatly appreciate your help there.